I am live now. Hello and what's up, humans of the earth and people who are going to be watching. Oh, we've got one viewer. Okay, good enough for now. Whoever you are, if you are human. And here we are again to read again Pompey the Great, the book, and continue from where we stopped last time with page 44, still on chapter 2 or 3. These chapters are crazy long because, I mean, look at the length of length of this page. And it's hard English with some names, but it's very interesting. So, yeah, uh, leave a message in the chat if you would like, and yeah, we can get started. Okay. Let me just put a message in chat to anybody who enters. Break. There we go. Let's begin. Metellus Pius had not been able to defeat Sertorius, and though it is said that Pompey probably underestimated his adversary, it seems likely that he did not underestimate the country. If he realized how difficult the campaigns would prove to be, he did not impart this opinion to his troops, or even to his friends, since pessimism at the start of a war is not very helpful. His officers could work out for themselves that Spain was a difficult country in which to seek and find an enemy, a difficult country in which to seek and find an enemy, especially one who knows the terrain and has the support of the natives. The campaigns hinged, as all campaigns do, and certainly as they would in the civil wars in Greece, on supplies. Henry the Fourth of France pointed out that Spain is a country where large armies starve and small ones are defeated. It was equally true of Spain in Pompey's day. His first concern was to secure the coastal towns so that he could be supplied by the sea. But at a later stage in the war, he noticed he would be severely hindered by the pirate fleets in alliance with Sertorius, which blocked access to the ports. By the end of 1706, the first year in Spain, Pompey had achieved even less than Metellus. His attention to the coastal cities drew Sertorius down to the plains around Valencia, where the two armies faced each other without engaging in pitched battle. The war centered on winning over tribes and cities and reducing resistance in those that could not be won over. Thus, Spanish people were bought into war that was not of their and bought into a war that was not of their making, and not fought for their benefit. Pompey met with defeat at Lauron, one of the cities that had refused to declare for Sertorius, and was consequently besieged by him. Pompey came to the rescue to to trap Sertorius between the city and his troops. But he seems to have failed to gather information, or at least he did not know that there were more Sertorian troops to his rear. Foraging became a problem. There was an area where Sertorius's men never seemed to patrol, so the Pompeian troops began to forage there, just as Sertorius had planned. The Pompeians were pinned down and surrounded, and when Pompey sent a general of his own to extricate them, he too was overwhelmed. While Pompey himself was prevented from moving by the Sertorian troops in his rear, he was helpless while his men were butchered, and to add the final insult to injury, Lauren capitulated. It was a hard lesson to learn, and his credibility was much reduced, since this was a bad example to other cities that may have resisted Sertorius, if only there had been a Pompeian victory at Lauren. In 75, Pompey had better success. He defeated Sertorius' generals, Perpenna and Heronius, and captured and destroyed Valencia, but then, departed from the plan, which was to wait, which was to wait for Metellus' troops to join him. He attacked Sertorius on the line of the river Sucro, thinking he had the advantage, but he was so disillusioned and nearly lost his life. He rode a white horse with golden trappings, commensurate commensurate with his rank and his importance, and no doubt with the intention of emulating Alexander the Great, but mostly in order to be recognized after he had nearly been killed by one of his own men in a previous battle where his helmet disguised him. The trouble was that Pompey was now far too recognizable and an easy target for the enemy. He fought leading his right wing, which succeeded in pushing Sertorius's left wing back, and it seemed that he would bring about a victory. Sertorius was in command of his own right wing, but once he knew that Pompey was winning the battle on the left, he rushed there himself with reserves. His Libyan bodyguard charged up to the enemy general on the white horse. Almost surrounded, Pompey had to dismount and get away on foot, abandoning his horse and leaving the enemy squabbling over the possession of the animal and its magnificent harness. Though he did not enjoy much success that day, Lucius Afranius on his left wing had done very well. At first, facing Sertorius himself, the men had begun to falter, but when Sertorius transferred to the other wing, Afranius surged forward, driving Sertorians back into and beyond their own camp. But while his men were looting, Sertorius himself came up and routed them. Another battle on the following day was averted by the arrival of Metellus. So Sertorius withdrew. He said that he would have thrashed the boy if the old woman had not turned up. The opposing forces did not engage again for some time, but employed harassing tactics, preventing each other from foraging. Supplies were hard to find because the area was already devastated, and now Pompey's army was joined by that of Metellus. The problem was compounded by the number of mouths to feed. Nobody here. Okay. Checking the. Okay. We just. Okay. Get back to it. The next battle was fought on the river Turia, near Saguntun. Pompey's scouts reported that Sertorius and Perperna were approaching with their whole army, so Pompey and Metellus braced themselves for a fight. Metellus faced Perpenna, and Pompey faced Sertorius. The battle was hard fought. Pompey's brother-in-law, Memmius, was killed, and Metellus, after an initial success, suddenly found himself opposed by both Perperna and Sertorius, gradually driven back and eventually fighting for his life. His men rallied, formed the tortoise with their shields all around and over him, and rescued him. It was not a victory for either side, except in so far as Sertorius marched away into the mountains to the headwaters of River Duno, finally taking refuge in the city of Clunia. Pompey and Metellus followed him and began to besiege the city, but the Spanish natives turned out in support of Sertorius and made life very difficult for his enemies. Since the season was already late and soon to the weather would make their lives even harder, Metellus and Pompey gave up and went into winter quarters. Pompey remained near Sertorius, setting up quarters in the Douro Valley, while Metellus crossed the Pioneer Pi- Pi- Pien- Pyrenees and wintered in Gaul. Pompey wrote to the Senate to ask for supplies and reinforcements. This was not the first such letter that he had written, but the early ones have not been preserved, so it has been assumed that the Senate was deliberately neglecting him by refusing to acknowledge his request. Seeger refused the idea that there was a corporate senat- senatorial policy behind the neglect, but some authors concede that Pompey had not received as much help as Metellus, and the support that did come was dilatory at best. Sallust, Sallust preserves and perhaps elaborates upon the letter Sallust preserves and perhaps elaborates upon the letter that Pompey wrote after the campaigning season of 75. The salient points that Pompey made in this communication were that he had supported this army from his own resources and had received hardly enough to cover his expenses for 1 year. Even though he had been at war for 3 years, even though he had been at war for 3 years. During this 3 years he had used up all his own wealth and had been exhausted and had even exhausted his credit. And now the soldiers had not been paid for some time. The most contentious part of the letter concerns the threat that if he received no support from the Senate, then the war could be brought into Italy. Some scholars have seen in this a form of blackmail, with Pompey hinting at the possibility of joining with Sertorius and Black Sertorius and marching on Rome together, a concept which has no foundation whatsoever. What Pompey implied was that if he was too weak to win the war, then there would be no barrier between the two ranges of mountains between Sertorius and Rome. This name, this the name of Hannibal need not be invoked, even though modern authors dismiss the possibility that Sertorius would have left Spain to follow Pompey. To contemporaries, the fear was probably real enough for Pompey's words to strike home. The outgoing consuls for 75 were not interested in Pompey's situation, but the consuls for the following year were more concerned. There was Lucius Licinius, Lucullus, and Marcus Aurelius Cotta. They had been appointed to a military command against Mithridates, whose empire-building activities had begun to impinge once more on Roman territory in the east. It was in their interest to see Pompey well supplied and supported in order to avoid a full full-scale disaster in Spain that might require resources that would have to be diverted from the Eastern war effort. If Pompey were defeated, and the whole province fell prey to Sertorius, the preoccupation of the Senate would be with the loss of revenue and the proximity of a hostile enemy in the west. The situation was further complicated by the fact that at some point, possibly now, when he will learn of the planned expedition of Lucullus, and Cotta, Mithridates sent envoys to Sertorius offering him an alliance. The date is disputed, but it is more likely that the offer of an alliance did not take place until the death of Nicomedes of Bithynia and the annexation of the kingdom by Rome, which in the eyes of Mithridates was highly disagreeable, not at least because it would bring Rome to his footstep and provide basis from which to attack him, quite apart from the fact that he had designs on the territory that he had designs on the territory himself. Preparing for war with Rome, Mithridates asked Sertorius for Roman officers to train his troops to fight like Romans, and for recognition of his conquests. Just gonna take this. I'm gonna send this link to some other people. I'll try to be fast. Second, I'll be fast. I'll be fast. I'll try to be fast. Let me just. Okay, back to it. Zero views. Zero viewers. No. Where was Dinia? Mithridates. Mithridates. Where was I? Okay. Sertorius called his senate and granted the first of these requests, but not the second, refusing to acknowledge that Mithridates had any rights to Asia Minor. In return for his cooperation in sending Roman officers, Mithridates dispatched money and ships to Sertorius. As Greenhalgh as Greenhalgh points out, Mithridates preferred to see Metellus and Pompey and their hundreds of troops tied down at the opposite end of the world. So did Lucullus, but on the other hand, he did not want them to be annihilated either. So he exerted himself strenuously on Pompey's behalf, with the happy result that supplies and 2 legions were sent to Spain. The sudden activity on Pompey's behalf and the hints in his letter that this was only one of a series of letters have been taken to indicate that the Senate had until now followed a deliberate policy of starving Pompey. But this perhaps to overstate the case somewhat. But this is perhaps to overstate the case somewhat. It is more likely that though supplies and resources were voted to him, and Metellus, the organization and administration had not been as efficient as it ought to have been. For military activities of 74, for the military activities of 74, there is little information, and for 73 there is even less. But the themes running through all the campaigns of Pompey and Metellus are the avoidance of pitched battles and the reduction and capture of of Spanish cities that were loyal to Sertorius. On his basis, the war in Spain was likely to be very slow and very hard. In 74, Pompey took Cauca, 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 I'm gonna go with that, by a ruse, asking for his quarters to be wounded, who once inside miraculously recovered and captured the city, but he failed at Palantia and Calaguris. Driven off by Sertorius in seven driven driven off by Sertorius. In 73, Appian says that both Metellus and Pompey redoubled their efforts against Sertorian strongholds. The whole war was beginning to go sour for both sides. The country was already exhausted for 2 years before when Pompey had written to the Senate, explaining the situation in both Spain and Gaul, where supplies had dried out because both countries were devastated. Sertorius was no less affected by the supply problem, and he faced another, more serious dilemma. Pompey and Metellus had not yet succeeded in decisively defeating Sertorius, but they were still there in Spain with their armies intact. So it was also true that Sertorius had not yet succeeded in decisively destroying them or driving them out. It was clear that even if he did, there would be another army sent from Rome, and so it would go on forever, while the Spanish cities and tribesmen bore the brunt of the fighting. Their loyalty did not crumble, but the dissensions grew between them and the Romans among the Sertorian army. Basically, the elements of the Sertorian forces were fighting for different ideals. Sertorius was carrying on a protracted civil war with whatever support he could find against a specific Roman government, that of Sulla. The Romans who fought with him were less and less convinced of the need to continue this war, especially since he seemed to favor the Spanish troops over them, because he had to rely upon their numbers in absence of loyal Romans. The Spanish tribes and city dwellers had different aims. They did not care about the civil war, but were opposed to the government by Rome. And if they had to fight under a Roman to keep Rome out of their affairs, they could they could resign themselves to anonymity by equating Sertorius with Rome's archenemy Hannibal, which name they had already labeled. What they did not see was that if the government changed in Rome to one to one to which Sertorius would be reconciled, he would probably go home because Rome was where he really wanted to be. Without this insight, the Spanish allies defined Sertorius as one of their own and began to turn against even the Romans who fought by their side. Desertion, desertion, desert Desertion, des- desertions, desertions. I forgot how to say this. My God, desertions began. Desertions. Well, you know that word. My God, began from the Roman contingents, especially when it was discovered that Metellus was already to pardon everyone who came over to him. In most circumstances, when this dissatisfaction begins to show among the followers of a particular leader, someone among the followers will begin to imagine that he or she can lead rather better than the current chief. Perperna considered his own pedi- pedigree superior to that of Sertorius, but perhaps had never recognized that his skill in conducting war was inferior. Apart from his faith in himself and his lack of faith in his master, his motives when he arranged to have Sertorius assassinated remain obscure. Invited to a banquet, Sertorius attended, unsuspecting and was killed. When this news reached Metellus and Pompey, it was decided that with Sertorius deleted, the campaign could be safely left in Pompey's hands. Perperna did what Sertorius had been careful to avoid, except when he had a clear advantage, he offered battle to Pompey, who presumably could not believe his eyes and then seized the opportunity with glee. Perperna allowed himself to be led into a trap, and was defeated and captured. He offered all Sertorius's cor- correspondence to Pompey, possibly hoping to bribe his way into the young general's confidence by allowing him the opportunity to find out who in Rome had been sympathetic to the cause. But it was a shabby trick, and was treated with disdain by Pompey, who earned a great deal of credit by promptly burning the whole lot without reading any of it. When this news reached Rome, there will there will have been sighs of relief among the closet Sertorians, and then afterwards a growing suspicion that maybe Pompey only said that he had burned all of the letters, whilst keeping a few for his own private designs. The sense of unease will have persisted until Pompey had been back in Rome for some time, and still no blackmail notes had arrived by special messenger. Only then would everyone accept that Pompey was not interested in that kind of hold on power. Cold water. Nobody here yet. I'm just gonna see if I can send this to any other people. Okay, let's get back to it. Okay, wait, where was I? Where was I? Okay, let me just take another sip of water. That war was over after 5 years for Pompey and more for Metellus. Two cities still held out, Uxama and Calaguris, but were reduced eventually. At Calaguris, there were tales of cannibalism at the siege, came as the siege came to a bitter and inglorious end. Spain had now to be brought back to Rome controlled, pacified, and reorganized. This sort of administration was one of Pompey's talents, which he combined sorry, which he combined with the recruitment of ad, adherents to swell the ranks of his clients. The most famous of these is Lucius Cornelius Balbus of Gates. What a name. Who received citizenship in 72 from Pompey. He became one of Caesar's most trusted associates, going on after the death of Caesar to become consul in 40, the first non-native Roman to reach the office. Metellus, too, recruited friends and clients and bestowed citizenship on individuals, possibly at Pompey's request. A law was passed in Rome by the consuls of 72, Lucius Gellius Piccola and CN Cornelius Lentulus Claudianus to ratify the grants of citizenship made by him and by Pompey in Spain. Pompey chose to mark his achievements in Spain by getting up a monument in the Pyrenees, not far from the Mediterranean coast, at Col de la Perche. There was no mention of Sertorius on the monument, because victories over the other Romans were not widely advertised, and in tri- triumphal pros- processions, the fiction was usually maintained that the war had been fought against an external enemy. The monument was in any case a glorification of Pompey and his troops. It was adorned with his statue and an inscription proclaiming that he had conquered 876 cities between the Alps and the borders of further Spain. The term city is presumably loosely applied to anything that happened to be fortified, including individual towers. Nonetheless, even with the hyperbole toned down, it denotes considerable achievement. The soldiers who saw it being erected or heard of it afterwards could share in this proud achievement, brought about through the talents and genius of their commander, Pompey the Great. Self-advertisement came naturally to Romans of the upper class. Pompey turned it into an art form. This early example of his sense of his own importance would be superseded when he campaigned in the East, founding cities in his own name, and accepting the worship of the people. But all that lay in the future. In the meantime, the usual problem for Pompey at the end of a war, that of what to do next, was neatly avoided at the end of 72, when he was recalled to Rome, not to disband his army and to lay down his command, but to fight another battle against the slave army of Spartacus. And that's it for that chapter, which lasted, well, my God, this is the next one, chapter 3. Yes, so we were on chapter 2. This is a crazy long chapter. My God, it lasted what, 2 live readings? That's insane, am I right? I mean, I was like, yeah, like 1.5 live, no, yeah, 2 live readings. My God. Actually, 2.5, yeah, no, yeah. Okay, well, We're I'm going to finish here because I think this is a good end. I'm just gonna read this little thing, what it says over here, because let's just see what it says. Curious. Head of Pompey with the characteristic hairstyle, deliberately emulating Alexander the Great. Courtesy by N.Y. Carlsberg Glyportek, Copenhagen. So I would just like to talk just a little bit, say something about the Pompey the Great and stuff like that. Like I've studied up quite a bit from Pompey from in the last few years, like COVID, where I started learning Roman history and stuff like that. Lots of history, and then after I kind of went a lot into World War One and World War Two, and the Cold War that interested, but a lot of Roman history I was into, and Julius Caesar and Pompey Civil War, which will come after in the book, I was really interested in because, well, just epic, you know, so many battles, so interesting the politics, how different people who later on would be on the side of Caesar. Like, there are people who later on would kind of switch sides and stuff like that, and end the civil war after that between Augustus and Mark Antony, which I didn't get that much into, and I need to get more into it. But it's really, I kind of confused when I think of that one because Augustus was like Julius Caesar's son or steps, something like that. I forgot. And then after Mark Antony was like his closest general, like his second right hand guy. And then they both went to war like over power and stuff like that. And Cleopatra with with Mark Antony, which who she was also before with Alexander the Great. No, not with Alexander. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. With Julius Caesar the Great, Julius the Great, and that's so confusing. Am I right? Because I mean, back then it was all about power with these big, powerful people from the Roman Empire and stuff like that. But yeah. But anyways, with Julius Caesar verse against Pompey, and now I'm reading this and I'm learning more about Pompey because I was lots learning about Julius Caesar, which whom I like a lot from what I've learned. Of course, there is some like stuff he's done that are like brutal and stuff like that, but it's not really that brutal when you think of that time period because everyone that was it was stuff that was not so brutal in that time period. It was stuff that like if you hear what even the Mongols, I mean, Mongols are absolutely brutal, but anyways, like stuff the Gauls or the Germanic tribes would do, it's like nothing compared to what like what Julius Caesar did was nothing compared to what they would do. Like all he would do is the most like big thing that I would see, two main big things is when one of his legions, I forgot which one, did mutiny in Gaul, and then after he punished them all and like hit them with made them be hit on the back, with the like hammer kind of thing, and it was all bruised and stuff like that. And also when there was the siege against Asterix, I guess. But I forgot his last name. Is Va something with V. The Well, anyway, on the siege against the big thing where he's on the city, he's completely surrounding the city, and then after the Gauls are in the middle, what's their name? Um, well, I'm guess I'm it's basically what Asterix and Obelix is based on, that battle, but instead they make Julius Caesar look like super evil because it was made by Belgian or French, I think French, because you'll always glorify your own history kind of a bit, but I mean no, he was very Asterix was very like, very good general and stuff and he wanted freedom for his people, but again, like I don't think anybody was really the bad guy in that situation. Rome, Julius Caesar was just doing what is normal in that era kind of, which is conquer and back then they wouldn't do what's now like you conquer and now you are they conquer nowadays you will conquer now you are whatever country conquers. I don't want to say anything, but then after but over then it's like you conquer, the land is yours, you can take resources and a lot of that stuff, but I guess goes on the same as before. They're not really changing their teaching, making them speak their language and stuff like that. So yeah, it was different back then. But anyways, yeah, I've been talking for way too long. Nobody appeared to disallow reading, so that's cool. And yeah, I might make a video on my other channel, Jotty the Great. Go ahead and check that out because it's my bigger channel. It's got 171 subscribers, and this one has only 44, which is also a lot, but not as much. Yeah, a lot for me. So, anyways, I hope you enjoyed the reading, and if you're watching on the recap, the catch up, I guess. Hope you enjoyed that. If you didn't listen to the last parts, part one, two, three, four, then go ahead and listen to those because otherwise, everything I just said probably makes absolutely no sense. What I said, what I read in this book, from the stuff I read in this book, will make no sense to you probably, unless you've read it already or something. But anyways, yeah, go check that out, and yeah, have a good morning, good late morning, good early afternoon, good late afternoon, good evening. I guess that's late afternoon even. And good night. Goodbye.